It's operations time again on the Willow Creek Railroad. In this video, we're going to focus on local freight train operations, specifically the river job turn. To set the stage, let's first talk about the run. If you haven't already viewed our Through Freight Operations video, I recommend that you do that to better understand the various locations on the railroad. Using this schematic of the Willow Creek Railroad, let's take a look at the route that our train, the RJ Turn, will take. Our train will start at the yard in Waverly and head east towards Bucky's Crossing. On our way over the mountains, we'll stop at Summit Springs to switch to local industries. Next, we'll proceed down the opposite side of the pass and stop at Upper Meadows to switch the major industry located there. Lastly, we'll proceed to the riverport town of Bucky's Crossing to drop off a couple cars. Once we leave Bucky's Crossing, our train will return to Waverly. Since we departed from and returned to Waverly, our local freight run is known as a turn. Okay, now let's look at the operations starting at Waverly Yard. Travis is again assisting as our road engineer on the RJ Turn. He picks up his engine card, train orders, and car cards from the yardmaster. He reviews his orders and then walks his train to make sure that the cars in his train match the car cards that he has been given. Let's take a closer look at Travis's instructions. The engine card tells Travis which engine he's operating today, including the engine's DCC address and any particular DCC functions of interest. Travis's train orders give him specific instructions for train RJ1, or what we now call the RJ Turn. He is to switch local industries per his car cards and waybills, setting out and picking up cars as instructed. Note that his train is limited to 8 cars in addition to the caboose. Finally, Travis has car cards and waybills for all 5 cars in his train. He has 2 cars for industries at Summit Springs, 1 for Upper Meadows, and 2 cars for Bucky's Crossing. Once Travis has walked his train and gets clearance from the dispatcher, he starts to head out of the yard. At the end of the yard, Travis waits for the tall dwarf signal to turn green. The 2-aspect block signal indicates that the block ahead of him is clear, but the red dwarf signal indicates the Waverly Junction turnout is not yet aligned. Once the signal turns green, Travis is cleared to leave the yard. The RJ Turn passes Waverly Junction and then rounds the bend across Sarlot Viaduct. Travis sounds his horn for the grade crossing ahead of him. His train makes its way up the mountains, first traversing Latah Pass and then Lookout Pass. Travis makes his way around the reversing loop and finally arrives at the Lookout Pass siding. This siding enables Travis to park his train off of the main line while he switches the industries at Summit Springs. The Willow Creek operates with a dispatcher who controls train movements throughout the railroad. Travis phones the dispatcher and notifies him that he has arrived at Lookout Pass and is ready to start switching Summit Springs. The dispatcher will notify the other trains headed in this area to watch out for local switching activity. To plan his work, Travis first checks the car card boxes at Summit Springs to see which cars he needs to pick up. At Summit Springs, there are 4 cars spotted at 3 industries. A boxcar is spotted at the freight depot, but has a special note on the waybill indicating the car should not be picked up by the RJ Turn. Another car is spotted at the bottling company and shows a destination other than Summit Springs, which means Travis will pick up this car. 2 cars are located at the brewery, but only one of them shows a destination other than Summit Springs. Travis will pick up this car. Evidently the other car is still being unloaded and or loaded. So now Travis knows which cars he needs to pick up. Travis returns to his train and uncouples the first two cars which he will set out at Summit Springs. He then positions his engine and cars to switch the trailing point turnouts in Summit Springs. As is typical in moves like this, Travis will first pull all cars that he needs to pick up from the industries. Then he will spot the cars that he needs to set out. He first pulls the one outbound car from the brewery, and then adds the outbound car from the bottling company track. He takes these two cars back to the Lookout Pass siding. These cars will be returned to Waverly Yard for classification and later routed to their final destinations. Travis now returns to Summit Springs to set out the first two cars at their respective industries as indicated on their waybills. The first car is spotted at the brewing company. And the second car is spotted next door at the bottling company. With his switching completed, Travis returns his engine to Lookout Pass siding. Travis completes his paperwork by taking the cards for the cars he picked up and leaves the cards for the newly spotted cars in the appropriate boxes. Finally, Travis calls the dispatcher and reports that his work is completed, and he's ready to move his train to the next destination. The dispatcher provides clearance, and the RJ turn leaves Lookout Pass siding. The train is now descending on the other side of the pass, headed to Upper Meadows. Upon arriving at Upper Meadows, Travis will again contact the dispatcher to report his position. For the sake of time, we won't show each of these contacts with the dispatcher. Because the mainline track is on a grade here, Travis positions his train so that the pickle car is by the brakeman figure we just passed, and then activates the automated hill brake to hold his train while he does his switching. Travis already knows that he has one car to set out here at Upper Meadows. He checks the car card box for the Richter Vinegar and Pickle Company and sees that he only has one car to pick up. As he did at Summit Springs, Travis takes the pickle car that he's going to set out along with the two cars in front of the pickle car, and he backs down the trailing point turnout to pick up the one outbound car. He picks up the outbound reefer and returns it to his train. He lowers the hill brake, repositions his train so he can uncouple at the new reefer, and reactivates the hill brake. Travis then returns to the industry to set out the pickle car, which the waybill indicates should be set out on the front track. After leaving the car at the pickle company, Travis takes his engine and the two cars and rejoins his train. He will again contact the dispatcher, and once he has clearance, will proceed on his journey. As you've seen, when our train left Waverly and went to Summit Springs, we used a reversing loop and returned back down the same track towards Upper Meadows. While repeating sections of track isn't necessarily the preferred way to run a model railroad, on the Willow Creek it gives us a longer distance to run trains. In fact, when the RJ turn runs from Waverly to Bucky's Crossing, it travels a physical distance of more than 200 feet. This gives us a nice long run, even on a 400 square foot layout. The RJ turn winds its way along Willow Creek and finally arrives at the yard limit sign for Bucky's Crossing. Here, Travis stops his train and contacts the yardmaster at Bucky's Crossing for permission to proceed. Remember that Travis has 2 cars to drop off at Bucky's Crossing. When the yardmaster changes the permission signal to green, Travis knows he can proceed on his way to Bucky's Crossing. Travis's route to Bucky's Crossing takes him through the long tunnel behind the town. His train peeks out briefly at Piper's Gap, and then again at the Marsh Trestle. He finally emerges along the shore of the Naugatuck River and enters Bucky's Crossing on the track designated by the yardmaster. Travis drops his caboose off before he pulls his train into the arrival track. Remember that Bucky's Crossing is the farthest most point of our turn, so we have to switch the engine and caboose end for end in our train so that we can depart Bucky's Crossing in the same direction that we arrived. The yardmaster uses the local switcher to pull the caboose onto another track. When Travis's train is ready to leave Bucky's Crossing, he will recouple with the caboose at the end of his train. Travis pulls his train forward and makes similar switching moves like we've seen at his other stops. He couples on to the outbound freight car. Moves it to the arrival departure track. And then sets out the 2 cars destined for Bucky's Crossing. The yardmaster will spot these cars in the local industries later this morning. Travis then returns his train to the arrival departure track. Next, Travis uncouples his engine and runs it around to the other end of his train, which will now be the front of the train when it departs Bucky's Crossing for Waverly. With the yardmaster's approval, Travis moves his train forward and then backs down to couple onto his caboose. His train is now ready to depart Bucky's Crossing, and Travis waits for the yardmaster and dispatcher to authorize his departure. The RJ turn now retraces its route back to Waverly. While Travis's train makes its way back across the railroad, let's finish our discussion about distance on the Willow Creek. Remember that the physical run distance between Waverly and Bucky's Crossing is a little over 200 actual feet, including track in the Summit Springs reversing area that we repeat. With a full crew operating on the Willow Creek, we have 3 trains running concurrently on the railroad. When we take into account the switching work the RJ turn does, the distance that the train has to cover, and the time required for various meets with other trains, it's not unusual for an operator to take 90 minutes or more in real time to complete this run. Travis's train finally arrives at Waverly's yard limit. He notifies the yardmaster of his arrival and then waits for the Waverly Junction turnout to be aligned and finally for permission to enter the yard. These signals are described in the through freight video. The RJ turn arrives in Waverly Yard and ties up on the arrival track designated by the yardmaster. This completes our video of operating a local freight on the Willow Creek Railroad. I hope that you've enjoyed the trip, and as always, thank you for visiting the Willow Creek.